be attributable to human error.
Hello, and welcome to the SciPhi show. I'm Joe.
And I'm Dave.
And I apologise for no premix today. My daughter has got a little bit of a cold, and she's passed it on to me, and I'm feeling awfully foobar, but I didn't want to stop the stream. I'm all right for the most part. I just on with the show.
Tougher than Trump.
Yeah. But yes, tonight we're going to be discussing nationalism. So, Dave, what do we mean by nationalism?
Hang on 2 seconds. Just need to call up some notes. I've just realized I forgot to load them up. I mean, I know something rough, but yeah. Okay, when we talk about nationalism, there's a bunch of different things we could be talking about. So there's consider something like a patriotism where we're dedicated to our country and we kind of believe our country is the best and want our country to be the best. Or there's something like ethno-nationalism, where it's white people only in my country. I love my country, but I only love the white people in it, and I don't want other people in it. But essentially, it's about organizing as a nation, and having certain common elements to the nation, such as promoting a language or a single language, common myths. It sort of concerns the idea of a nation itself, if we're talking about that kind of thing as well. Like, what does it mean to be a nation? But there's a lot to cover, and I think we're best off focusing on a singular element. Okay. Rather than, does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, we can always come back to other aspects in the future. If anyone out there is interested in this topic or has any critique or questions, we can always come back to it. And we'll go from whatever you think. So what aspect of nationalism do you think is best to cover off in, say, the first chapter of this?
Let's go with something like the ethics of nationalism. So go with what David Miller calls liberal nationalism.
Okay.
And it's sort of in contrast to, do you remember us talking about cosmopolitanism in the political discussions and the moral discussions?
I remember it being mentioned.
Understandable. We've covered a lot of stuff since then. Okay, so cosmopolitanism is the idea that all people are of equal moral value, regardless of their ethnicity, gender, class of birth, and place of birth. So basically, we're all equal. We're all worthy of the same equal rights and dignities and moral attitudes.
Yep.
Now, the thing about that is that would mean that the poor people outside your house begging for change are of no more worthy consideration to be helped than the poor people in Africa, Bangladesh, places like that.
So then we could do the same sort of comparison, say, with a house that's on fire and a house that's not on fire. They both deserve the same amount of water under that sort of thing. Right.
Yeah. And that's something that liberal nationalism kind of looks at, in that there are universal ethics, like help the needy. That's a root ethic that lies and applies equally to all people. So the needy in Bangladesh are no less worthy of help than the poor in England. But we have to look at what we can do.
Mm-hmm.
So, say my sister needs help and you need help.
Mm-hmm.
Both the exact same kind of help. So in cosmopolitanism, I have no reason to choose her or you.
Right.
But in real life, we all have kind of family obligations, don't we?
Yep.
So, under ethical particularism, there are relationships that sort of take precedence and add to the weight of our moral obligations. So we can have special obligations to those closest to us, parties we belong to, communities, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So according to ethical particularism, I should help my sister.
Yep.
And if everybody followed that sort of thing, your relatives would help you if they could.
Mm-hmm.
And if they couldn't, your friends would. And by doing this kind of thing, we were better positioned to know how that person needs help and better positioned to help them.
Mm-hmm.
And if everybody in the community behaved like that, we would have a better community.
Mm-hmm.
If every community helped like that, we would have a better gathering of communities. If every city behaved like that and helped each other, then it would spread until it reached the nation.
Mm-hmm.
So by helping, we have special obligations to those in our nation, simply relational to our communities and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And by helping each other like that, if everybody across the world did that, then it and helped in their nation, then we would be better positioned to help other nations that needed that help.
Yeah.
So focusing on our nation might not necessarily be unethical.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And that's essentially what liberal nationalism is in the sense of ethics. Now, you could say, well, then ethno-nationalism isn't immoral because, it's just nationalism. It's helping your nation. But at the base level, you're discriminating against particular parts of your nation because not everybody in the nation is white. And if you're kicking them out to create a white nation, then you're not behaving according to liberal nationalism
Right.
because you're not helping the people in your nation, you're persecuting them.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely agree with that. So I mean, realistically speaking, if you were supposed to be doing this properly, everybody within the nation would be treated in a way, as you were saying, from that individual relationship, and then you expand out to communities, etc. So your nationalism ought to be nationalism. I don't know why half the letters disappeared there.
It's that kind of day.
Yeah, do you know? I notice I actually do that quite a lot. When listening back to the podcast during the editing, I quite often miss half the letters of the words I'm saying as I'm talking through. My brain and mouth obviously don't communicate well enough, and I just
I can relate to that. Yeah, I speak like that all the time. I'm surprised Emma knows what I'm saying half the time.
And I've completely forgotten what my point was as well. Being
That's all right.
yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. We'll keep this one short, because you need rest. So yeah, when we speak of nationalism, normally what we think of is like the EDL types and the BNP types and the alt right, isn't it?
Yeah, so yeah, that's where I was going. If you were thinking about how nationalism ought to be applied, it should include everyone who is part of your nation, and it should not discriminate against anyone. But generally, when people are nationalists, you do tend to think of those people who are like those Britain First groups and stuff like that. Want everything back British, yeah.
Yeah.
Talking about Islamic ray guns and all that.
One of my favorite video clips ever. I mean,
What is it though, actually, about the number of people that you see are these incredibly bigoted nationalists that you see, whether it's in the UK or America or but probably anywhere else, but they're the two main groups that are thrust in my face, all seem to be quite that lowbrow, unable to string a coherent sentence together. I know I have been fucking up a bit, but shh. Yeah, I don't know. Oh, and Opie's joined us. He said, check out Gary Edwards' videos on nationalism. Yeah, okay, will do.
Nice one. Yeah, we'll check them out. To be honest, I want to go deeper into the actual ideologies and stuff like that. But I need to actually prepare a lot more for that. And, with you being ill, I don't want to keep you too long.
No, that's cool. It's just good to get the basics off, find out if this is a topic that people are actually interested in. If they're not interested in the topic, then we'll have the discussion ourselves because I'm interested, and we can put it out
Yeah,
there.
and hey, Opie. But yeah, it's one of the things is, like you were saying, when you think of nationalism, you think of the EDL types, the BNP types, the lowbrow drunkard football hooligans tearing up a town center in the name of anti-Islam. But there is more to it, and I thought I'd start off on a positive note,
Okay.
because eventually we're gonna get into the negatives, aren't we?
Oh yeah, and I think we should definitely play some of the clips for shits and giggles too.
Yeah. So nationalism isn't always a bad thing, and I think the idea that there are special moral obligations is one that can be argued for. Like, we do have obligations to our friends, we have obligations to our communities, depending on what moral theory you follow, of course. If you're an emotivist or a subjectivist, you're not really going to think these kind of things.
Oh, we just had a message from Chris. Hi, Chris. How you doing? Any
Hey,
questions?
Chris.
Put them through. So yeah, you're saying so it's not always necessarily a bad thing, though people tend to think of it in a bad way, generally because of these hateful groups, etc. But it can be done in a good way.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about the origins of ire,
Mm-hmm.
like after breaking away from the English, they created their own nation. So what they did was they sort of created internal myths, like the freedom fighters, picked a solitary religion that they could all unite under, kind of went back to Gaelic. They created a central thing for everybody to follow, so it would unite the nation quicker after such discord.
Mm-hmm.
So nationalism can help in that sense too.
Yeah, fair. What issues would that suffer though?
Well, again, it's the idea of a nation. If you promote that your nation is only those who are true Gaelic and anyone else who isn't a part of your nation, you start having those problems. Just like the BNP with their, well, if you don't have relatives going back to the 1300s and you've got black in your family, then you're not really British. It can create problems like that. And that, a nation is made up of many different cultures. If you just think about Great Britain itself, it's made up of Scottish
Roman,
culture.
Saxon,
Yeah. And even today, it's Scottish, Welsh, English, Northern Irish. So it's a lot of different stuff.
Yeah.
So it gets complicated. Even in England, you think about the North-South Divide.
Yes.
It's almost like two different nations, but you would consider you would consider them the same nation. They share some common myths. They share a common language, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
But the accent's very different. Ideals are very different. So nationalism is kind of hard.
Mm-hmm.
But the liberal nationalism, there's also an idea from Martha Nussbaum.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember what it's called now, but I think it's something like benign patriotism, where you have national holidays, you promote what's good about your country and celebrate what's good about your country, but also recognize that it may be involved in bad things, like wars are bad things, slavery was a bad thing. You celebrate what's good, though, and unite people through these kinds of holidays and gatherings, and sort of promote the idea that you should work towards building a better nation united.
Yeah, Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I can definitely see the idea to work towards looking after your country and everything like that. As you said, there's the obvious issues where you start trying to go, well, no, you're not part of the nation, and you're not part of the nation, and the nation needs to be this particular way. It needs to fit into this small box rather than accepting the nation for what it truly is. And I think pretty much every country around the world is pretty much a melting pot of different cultures, faiths, ideas, and all that sort of thing. So really, we should look at it as a whole. And to be honest, I'd almost expand nationalism to Earthism. If it was possible, I can.
Well, that's what cosmopolitanism is.
Yeah, fair.
It's globalism in a moral sense.
But even that regards everybody as equal, doesn't it?
It does.
So I mean, what I'm saying is there are obviously situations where you will have to look at it and go, actually, this person needs more help. It's instead of just purely pure equality, it's equity. Um,
Yeah.
and it's bringing everybody up to an equal petting. Someone who is in a poorer area with worse schools and less money, etc., is going to find it harder to get out of that area than someone who has a lot of wealth and can be paid for private tutors, and their father can get them into various doors, so they've got these jobs. You look at how many actors, for example, have kids that go on to be actors themselves, and singers that go on to be, they're already in the limelight. They're just there. It's a lot harder for someone to go from nothing to something. Now, people can do it. It's obviously people can do it and have done it, but I mean, that's one of the things that I think is possibly difficult to actually truly get that balance right.
Yeah. For anyone interested in something like that, have you heard of Peter Singer?
I have heard of him. Yeah.
Okay. He promotes something called effective altruism. And that might be worth looking into. It's quite a popular movement these days.
Was he also welfareism?
Kind of. He also promotes preference satisfaction
Preference
utilitarianism.
satisfaction utilitarianism. Yes. I was wondering if he was also the one that did welfareism. I can't remember off the top of my head.
I think that's kind of a mixed pot.
Yeah, fair.
But
In fact, I've just loaded up our episode, and we did actually quote both Singer and Blackburn, and R. Crisp and more. So
Roger Crisp.
yeah, so there we go.
Yeah. So he's worthy of looking into. And if you think of liberal nationalism as something like effective altruism, Singer talks about it at a global level. So if you don't need a pair of trousers today, but we're going to buy them instead of buying them, give the money to a famine relief thing.
Mm-hmm.
But say in liberal nationalism, rather than doing that, you would find some way of investing the money in your neighborhood or helping somebody else in your neighborhood.
Yeah, fair.
And to be honest, I think something like liberal nationalism, I'm a cosmopolitanist to some degree, but I think liberal nationalism has some very valid points
Mm-hmm.
in that, we can, if we do what's most effective that we can do, and everybody else does the same thing, eventually we'll think of it like virtue ethics.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually it will create a better society and a better world.
Yeah, fair. So, I mean, where do you stand? Because you said cosmopolitanism in itself was treating everybody as equal around the world, so there's no more moral duty to one than another. Do you not see the difference? From a country that's clearly being that's clearly struggling and is being used and abused by a more well-off country. Do you not think that maybe they need some more intervention than, say, another country that is not being abused as much?
Oh, yeah. But I think that situation creates a kind of ethical particularism in that we then have special obligations to help that country if we can. we should focus on our own, but if somebody needs help, we have an obligation to help them if we can, as long as it doesn't put us into the same situation as them, because then no help has actually happened and it's just made everything worse.
Yeah, I suppose we could go back to the whole what it's like when you're on a plane and they say sort your own mask out first and then sort out the person next to you if they need help, because
Exactly.
if you don't sort out your own mask and then you end up dying or passing out, then obviously you're not going to be able to help anyone else, whereas if you sort yourself out first, then actually you're in a situation where you can help others.
Exactly. And that's sort of part of the argument for liberal nationalism.
Fair. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. There's also an idea from Thomas Pogge, or Pogge, where we have a negative duty as well. So even if we're not helping another nation, it is our moral duty to do our best to make sure that what we're doing doesn't harm them
Mm-hmm.
and doesn't make their situation worse. So to some extent, you could say, imagine Apple in China using this sort of slave laborish, or Nike using child labor. We have a duty not to make sure that Nike doesn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Even if we're not going out and helping those people get better, we have a duty to make sure that our businesses and our dealings don't actively harm that other nation,
Yeah.
especially for our own benefit.
Yeah, but what about a situation where, I mean, this is probably more playing devil's advocate than anything I particularly believe myself. But say there is a country, it's completely poverty stricken, and actually there's no work, but Nike or Apple or whoever can go in there and get that cheap labor, and even though they are technically abusing those people, they're still in a better situation, and by preventing them from going in, more will die than not letting them go in. How do you sort of justify that one?
Yeah, that's a difficult one. Um, I see what you mean, but the best situation would be to make sure that Nike plays fair rather than takes advantage of them.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I mean, it definitely would be the best situation, but how can you do that as
well,
well?
if everybody said, I'm not buying your products until you do it properly, then Nike would do it properly.
So boycotting.
Yeah. It might harm the other country initially, but Nike wants those profits, so they will have no choice, really. Even if you allow them to get it cheaper, don't allow them to pay poverty wages. So those people are sort of stuck working 70 hours a week just to make sure that they have breakfast on Saturday.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. I mean, I
And
suppose.
again, well, that would only be effective in something like if every nation saw it that way, of
Hmm.
course.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the toughest things with separate governments and cultures and all of that sort of thing, isn't there? There's no unified approach to anything. People see things in incredibly different ways. There are still some countries that are very antiquated and patriarchal in their ideals, and there are others that are moving forward. There are some that are really, really progressive with their things on sexuality, and in others you can be killed for being gay or atheist or something like that. Um, and when you come to looking at a situation like this, you know, the country may allow, for example, Nike to go and do that sort of thing, and other countries might go, well, I can get it cheap, so I'm not going to boycott them because then they'll have to move the work to a place where it costs more, and etc. etc. And I guess that's people thinking more about their own back pocket rather than what's necessarily best for the world. So, how do we get to a situation where we can at least get people to think from a moral perspective and be on the same page with what ought to happen with these sort of companies? How do we attack this?
Yeah, if I could solve that, then I would already have my PhD.
Well, there's plenty of people with PhDs, and they haven't got a clue either, I guess.
No, that's it. Peter Singer's effective altruism is an attempt to solve something like that.
But again, it needs everyone to buy in, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And there seems to be little way to create moral obligation for everybody. If you think about it, people argue like emotivism. Morals are simply the specifying a preference. I don't like it when you do that, but I am the judge of whoever that is.
Yeah.
Nobody has the right to tell me how to behave. I mean, to some degrees, religion kind of has the handle on that
Mm.
because they have this united, well, God says it, so therefore this is what you must do. But again, not everybody's religious. Not everybody believes in an individual religion. Uniting everybody morally is hard.
Yeah, definitely. Especially when you can, as you say, with religion, you can pick holes in so many of the morals as well, because so many of them were written at a time, again, back to patriarchal and all sorts of laws against, or morals, as they might say, against various sexualities, etc. And again, we're back to the same issue of we're not treating everybody well necessarily.
I
So
think one of the only ways to solve this is to have enough resources for everybody globally, which isn't likely to happen.
yeah, or mass genocide would, and just leave one country standing and then just send everybody out to each individual country just to start their own bit and then work that way up and only allow the people to survive who agree with this and to have to spread the same thing on.
That's I seem to remember a group like that in the 1930s.
I'm not seriously suggesting mass genocide.
Yes, you are. Don't try and play it off now, you dictator.
I'm definitely a dick. I'm not sure about the tater.
But yeah, it's a difficult situation, and I don't think it's going to be solved anytime soon.
No, I suppose until we reach an age where we get to more use through renewable energy and synthesized foods and almost to that sci-fi-esque sort of state where
The next gen sort of state.
yeah, until we get to that, I don't see there being any easy resolution to it. And I suppose all we can do is try and broach each situation as it comes up and try and discuss with people who are acting in ways that we would perceive to be immoral and try and convince them of a better way to behave. But generally, I find that people who are stuck in a particular mindset, so if we go with the negative nationalists again that we were speaking of originally, they're not going to listen to anyone. They're in their in group. Unless you're in the in group and you've got their respect, they're just going to instantly just ignore what you say anyway. So it's kind of a tough one, really.
Yeah, they also use a lot of bad arguments. Like a popular one I've heard from them is a dog can be born in a stable, but it doesn't make it a horse. Not a good argument. But that's their argument for why only white people can be British or, only white people can be American, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't agree.
No, I don't. It's kind of telling because it sort of shows that they don't see non-whites as the same species.
Yeah, when really we're all human at the end of it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, basically.
I don't know why someone would separate just based on the pigment of skin.
I don't. But it's like you said, it's a hard one because they're not going to listen to anybody. They're stuck in their ways. They've usually been brought up in that environment. It's been enforced into them. they've been indoctrinated. How do you battle that indoctrination? I mean, perhaps something like benign patriotism and liberal nationalism
Sorry.
put forward.
Chris just says he's a salmon-coloured unicorn. Yes, you are, darling.
But, you know, if you perhaps taught a lesser form of nationalism, it might counter that in schools. So if they're hearing that white nationalism, that alt-right dialogue going on in their house, they can say, well, that's not how nationalism is. But again, when you're a kid, you hear your parents, that's what you think and believe.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, racism and things like that, any forms of bigotry, do start in the home. I think one of the movies that I watched when I was much younger, American History X,
Brilliant
sort
film.
yeah, absolutely fantastic. Sort of showed how that was the case, and there are lots of things that you think about that you learn and you grow up in an environment. You say certain things. I mean, even growing up as a kid in Croydon, we used the term gay in a derogatory way. Now, as a kid, I didn't actually understand anything about what being gay was, for example. It was just a term for, oh, they're so gay, they're so gay. And there was no actual intent there. But obviously, growing up and understanding, you go, oh, crap. But it's also been one of those reflex things that sometimes I might say and go, sorry, I didn't actually mean that. It's yeah, you know, and you feel like a right dick for saying so. But so you can even through that. Now there are some people who might have carried on that and actually taken on to when they learnt what gay actually meant and understood it a little bit better. Then went, so we use gay in a bad way, and gay is this, and all of a sudden they become bigoted against that. I also know that my mum always used to make faces on TV if she ever saw any lesbians on there. And my sister has anytime she sees it, has picked up that. She's like, and I'm like, what's wrong with two people in love, man? You know,
Yeah.
it's icky. And you're like, shut up.
Yeah. But believe it or not, quite a lot of my family are racist and homophobic. I mean, you couldn't tell it from speaking to me, but unfortunately, it's the case.
Yeah, it is crazy, and obviously it hasn't spread to my brothers or me, and as you say, it hasn't spread to you. So, but there is that there that just being in an environment, and you know, there was never necessarily any hate from my mum on that part. It was just she found it all a bit. So my sister finds it all a bit. But you can see just from that if there was that hate there, how that could have easily passed on to at least one of us. And actually, hate's a far more passionate emotion, and you'd be if you hate something, you're far more outspoken about it, aren't you? So around the dinner table, oh, you never guess what this so and so did, and this blah blah, and all of a sudden, you know, as a kid, you're being influenced by these things. You get these thoughts in your head, and all of a sudden, you're there. So I think you're right in a way. By if it's like we were saying that philosophy, especially ethics, should be taught in schools. The same way that actually, if we did go for a form of nationalism that was an all-inclusive form of nationalism, it would actually, you know, they might go back to school and go, well, why are you saying that it's only the white British people? Because I mean, I've been learning at school that it's all British people, and all of us who live in this country are British, and it doesn't matter how long that we've been here. And you could start to chip away at the problem, but even then, as kids, we are still very, very, very heavily influenced by our parents or other guardians. So it can be quite a hard one to battle.
Exactly. And if we think back to the episode about rationality, we can say it's rational for kids to believe what their parents tell them over what somebody else tells them because they see their father figure or mother figure as an authority on these topics.
Yeah.
So it does become difficult. And another way something like liberal nationalism could help is the idea of a liberal outlook for a country's ideals. So if your country if it became part of the mantra of your country that we were an accepting country, we think of how Christianity affected Britain when it came to gay people,
Mm-hmm.
because Christianity and the nation were linked. And then since the 80s, it has become sort of cultural to be more accepting of those things.
Mm-hmm.
So if that became a fabric of the nation, that would alter and influence the way how accepting people were. So national ideas can also help in a good way.
Yeah. I suppose you know something that might go against that is a country which is very pull up your bootstraps. I managed to make it. Why can't you? There are a lot of people like that in certain countries around the world. So how would we broach that in that sort of country as well?
Yeah, that's a difficult one again, because that's already
Ingrained within the
yeah,
fabric of the.
sorry.
Yeah, no, I know what you're gonna say.
Yeah, I was just I've not long finished eating before coming to stream, so
Fair.
yeah, like you say, it's ingrained, and it's a part of the national identity. Well, we're the kind that, we make it on our own. So perhaps a better understanding in schools of just how much goes into keeping the nation going, and everything that goes into. Remember what we were saying about modesty
Yes.
last week, and how it's understanding just everything that went into making it able for the successful person to have those advantages.
Mm-hmm.
If that was taught, rather than, oh, these people, self-made, if it was better understood that, we have people that built roads, we have people that do transport, we have all these things that go into making the successful person, even though they have taken advantage of those prospects that they had. It wasn't just them. They didn't build the nation single-handedly. They didn't build the transport system. So maybe learning in schools about that kind of thing, it might help in situations like that.
Yeah.
And
I
if it
sp-
became part of the national identity that modesty was a good thing, that might help.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely agree with that. Um, so for anyone who did actually miss the last episode, when we were talking about modesty, we were talking about well, it was our conversation about virtues, and we were just speaking about the way you might respond and how someone might be falsely modest or um, be overly arrogant and not modest at all and be like, yeah, I'm the best, sort of thing. And um, we gave the example, for example, of me DJing. Now, someone might say to me, "Oh, you're really good," and I'd go, "Well, not really. I mean, I'm okay. I know how to use the bit of kit. I can do a couple of mixes that sound all right. Every now and then, I drop a complete banger, and it really works. But I'm not completely au fait with it. I use a bit of the auto sync, and it's not always completely. I hear lots of mistakes, but it's good enough to be presentable to an audience, and the average person might not you know notice the mistakes, but I'm not actually that good. There are millions of better DJs out there from me, and that was an example of how it could be done in a modest way. That's not me going, no, I'm not, no, and hoping for another compliment, and that's not me going, yeah, I'm best, yeah, you should always listen to my mixes. um um and so yeah, you're right. If we had people actually thinking about modesty and it taught to be that right level of modesty, because I find that most people do tend to go for that, well, go on, no, I'm not, no, in general. Now, whether that is them genuinely looking for a compliment or just being incredibly
The-
unconfident in their own abilities or finding the compliment embarrassing. I mean, I must admit, I sometimes find compliments embarrassing and I don't know how to react to them. And I sort of deer in headlights freeze and I'm just like, okay, thanks.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I barely know how to respond in any social situation. So
Well, that's why we're on the internet, right?
exactly. That's why I stick to my books and, my laptop and my writing. It's much easier. Um, but yeah, I mean, nationalism, it can be a good thing. Uh, so I thought, start off on a good note. Like now, we've seen some positives to how nationalism could work.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and you're right. There are ways that it could work if applied correctly and taken into the social schema rather than it being groups of nationalists. It became a nation of nationalists
Yeah,
with the same ideals and everything, and looking after the entire nation and being accepting and being modest, etc., etc. So, virtue-based nationalism.
yeah, something like that. If you think of it in terms of exclusion, nationalism based on exclusion is bad, but there can be a nationalism based on inclusion, and that's not just inclusion of your own people, the people in the nation or your own skin color, but inclusive of other nations. It's just that you sort of focus on your own first, so that, like in your example of the oxygen mask, so that you can focus on helping others.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Chris said, "What if we got rid of all the boundaries, as in borders?"
Okay. John Rawls kind of speaks about this in Law of People. If you got rid of all the borders, you would have one giant world nation. And eventually you would have people who sort of take it upon themselves to want to be a ruler or want to be in charge. And there can be infighting, a lot of different stuff like that. We can actually talk about John Rawls in the next one if that would help.
Yeah, that sounds good. Chris, are you okay to wait for the next one? We'll go into that one in a bit more detail.
I need to brush up on it, see. But that's his basic argument, that smaller pockets of nations are better because there would be less people wanting to rule, less people. It would be easier to focus on helping smaller groups than it is one large group.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Actually, that sort of thing that you just said reminded me of a Douglas Adams quote from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I think it was. Um, I'm just, yeah, it's a well-known fact that those people who must want to rule people are generally those who are least suited to it.
Yeah.
uh, and oh, bloody pop-ups. um, anyone who is capable of getting themselves made president should on no account be allowed to do the job. Now, how much does that actually apply to the world as we see it right now? You look at Trump and Johnson and plenty of other leaders from around the world, but obviously they're probably the two on the tip of most people's tongues when discussing.
They were on mine when you said it.
Yeah, I mean,
Bolsonaro.
blimey, they could quite easily be each head of Zaphod Beeblebrox, couldn't they?
Yep.
Excellent.
Well, another one, going back to John Rawls and the idea of a global world. If you think of something like North Korea, you had a family that wanted to rule and create a dynasty, so you would still have that going on even in a global nation.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that would be really hard to govern unless you got to the point where you had well, you eventually eroded everybody's privacy, and there was such a strict structure in place, and there were drones constantly with guns and making sure everybody was always in line at all the time. And
Think of something like this pandemic as well. Borders and stopping people crossing them helps stop the spread of. So if you had a world where you could go anywhere you want, even during a pandemic, makes it kind of harder. So you would still, and in order to look after the global world economy, as John Rawls says, or, this global world nation, you would still have to create districts.
Yes, and you'd need a king of each district or whatever, the governor,
Or,
to look after it, and then and then you'd probably get into the thing like in America, where each state has its own laws and not just the same as the country's laws, and you'd probably end up with everywhere around the world having its own sort of state, wouldn't you, with that sort of thing?
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think the idea of no borders and globalism, there is something to it. In that if we had similar laws across the world, we had similar attitudes, similar levels of wealth, but it's not particularly borders that are the problem, I don't think. Borders would be created even in that kind of thing, even in a global sort of environment.
Yeah.
Just in a different way.
Again, it's sort of bringing equitability to the world as the end goal, rather than although, I mean, the whole borders thing, back to the pandemic, you can see the countries that haven't cared about it as much are having so many more cases, and the countries that have been quick to push people back into work, etc., and allow them to cross over. I mean, there are even British Columbia in Canada were doing really well, and as soon as they allowed people to travel back in, they suddenly got hundreds of cases again.
Well, we're in lockdown here at the moment in the county that I'm in.
You're back in lockdown again.
Yeah. We had got the cases almost to zero. And then Wales opened the border and said, you know what, people from England can come in holiday here. And people came here, didn't wear masks, didn't respect social distancing. And the cases have shot right up. So now nobody's allowed in or out of the county.
You bastard English people. And I'm talking to me that I can see in the camera right there.
Yeah. Well, you didn't come to London or anywhere like that, so.
No, I didn't. Although I do love it there. It is really nice.
It's nice, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm very lucky to live here.
Yeah, definitely. No, Battersea Coed and all those areas around there. Beautiful, beautiful part of the country.
Yeah, well, it's all ours now, and nobody can come take it.
Bloody nationalists.
Yeah, countyists. But yeah, I mean, we're in lockdown again. So yeah, borders can help, even if it's county borders.
Yeah.
But if you like going back to the British Columbia thing and here, now think about New Zealand. Yep. They stopped their borders immediately, closed them off, went into complete lockdown, and they basically eradicated it and then opened the borders up. And weirdly enough, English people went there and the cases shot up.
Yeah.
And I say that as an English person.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there have been examples of that, haven't there? There's also been the odd random resurgence in places where they're like, but how? They don't quite know how the virus has survived, but I imagine that's because of asymptomatic people within families interacting and the virus remaining within all of them, because things have been relaxed, and then suddenly
everyone mixes together and boom. Yeah.
I still think the best thing would have been, and this would be a benefit for having a world government as well, would have getting the entire world to fully lock down for a month. No one's allowed out. All deliveries are done online. I know that's kind of hard. I mean, when it first went into it, it was sometimes a month between each delivery I could get.
It's got like that again here now.
Oh no! Oh well, yeah, you're back in full lockdown. Yeah, luckily we're not so bad yet. And I am quite lucky that we've got a local co-op just down the road, like literally a 2-minute walk. So
same. If
there is anything we need, generally we can get to it. But when we first went into lockdown, people raided the shelves. And that's something else I just didn't get, especially toilet paper. Paper and eggs. I mean, if you're eating that many eggs, you're not going to be needing the toilet paper.
I was just about to say, I bet there's people still using the toilet paper from the original lockdown.
Do you know what's worse? I mean, I actually do my an auto order on Amazon, and I order one massive load every 2 months. And it's just cost effective to do it that way. I don't have to think about it. I never have to put it on my shops. But my order was cancelled from Amazon for 4 months. It's like, yeah.
Bloody hell.
It's just like,
Yeah.
really? I just need some toilet paper, man. But then this is another thing. The selfish attitude breeds other people to be selfish attitude, and then people go, oh, there's this here. Well, I'm going to grab it, otherwise someone else will, and I won't be able to get it in a couple of weeks' time.
Yeah, see, liberal nationalism would have sorted that out because it's about looking after your neighbors as well as yourself.
Yeah. So, you'd buy that toilet paper and then deliver it to all of your neighbours and say, I managed to get us all a couple of bog rolls. Next time you go out, maybe you'll do the same back. Not that you'd say that, but if it was.
But that's the idea, yeah.
Hmm.
But Chris's global, no borders thing also has an advantage in that a government with no borders might be able to ship resources back and forth. Within a nation, it's actually kind of much easier, but at a global level, a global thing with no borders would be easier to, say, transfer funds from where America is now to Bangladesh.
Yeah. I suppose if you did have a world government, you'd probably end up with a world currency and everything like that as well. And
yeah,
yeah,
there's advantages to both.
Yeah, fair. So, is there anything else you think that we need to cover on nationalism tonight before we sign off?
No, I think that's about it. It gives a basic grounding for what we talk about next, basically.
So tonight we've basically covered off the very basics of nationalism, what it is, some positive qualities to it, as well as mentioning a couple of negative qualities to it as well. And in the future, we are going to be addressing a few different topics, looking at particular nationalist groups, perhaps playing a few of the videos and maybe a couple of their remixes because they can be pretty funny in themselves.
Islamic ray guns.
And yeah, thank you everybody who has been watching tonight and participating.
Yeah, thanks, Chris and OP.
And all the other of you out there that were watching, because I can see you there, but you're just lurking. Feel free to drop into the chat room and say hello anytime. Don't be afraid. And also to everybody that's watching the rerun of this, hello. And goodbye. Sorry.
Well,
go.
Before we go, for the next one, I'm thinking, with all the reading I've been doing the last couple of days and the article I'm about to write, how about a discussion about atheism's origins in ancient Greece?
Okay, yeah. Did you want to do that one Thursday or wait till next Tuesday for our next stream?
Well, I'm going to be taking all the notes and starting the article tomorrow, so we could do it Thursday if you fancy, unless you prefer something else.
Yeah, I'm okay.
Do you want to rest so you can recover from this cold?
I suppose we've also got that call with Reason Press tomorrow to plan the podcast they want to do with us. So, I mean, maybe if
leave it till next Tuesday.
Leave it till next Tuesday, and we'll do Origins of Atheism, and we'll get some comments on this stream and any questions that you've got on it that would be prudent for the next chapter as well. So we also need to catch up with Ozzy. I still haven't caught up with him yet. About having him on there and discussing New Atheism. So I will catch up with him this week and maybe get that one booked in for a couple of weeks' time.
Nice one.
We'll also, Steve would like us on his stream as well, wouldn't he?
Awesome.
So that'll be in a couple of weeks' time as well. We're going to get that sorted. So we might not be doing 2 a week on our stream for a little bit. We might only be doing 1 stream because we are going to be on Reason Press podcast. And we're going to be on Steve's show. And this week I am ill and I am struggling a little bit, but you probably couldn't tell because I always sound like an idiot anyway.
Same. But if they keep an eye on the blog, I'll be outputting a lot more content.
Yeah, so answersinreason.com, there's loads of articles on there. I've also we're going to start releasing season 3 of the Fresh Air podcast, and the Fresh Air podcast has got a couple of different bits to it as well, inclusive of video / PDF tutorials. So you can either watch the video or you can actually read the PDF whilst listening to us discuss the topic. So we're trying something a little bit different with Fresh Air, and hoping to reach a different audience. As always, if you've got any comments, complaints, or whatever, please leave them in the messages everywhere that you are. Like, subscribe, etc., and all that jazz. And hopefully we'll catch you all next time. So you have been watching the SciPhi broadcast, and I am Joe.
And I am Dave.
Good night, all.
Good night. Good night, Opie and Chris.
And the rest of you.